Okay, most of us probably think we know exactly how the story of Joan of Arc ends, right? In 1431, at just 19 years old, she was tied to a stake in the market square of Rouen and tragically burned alive for heresy. But what if I told you that is absolutely not the end of the story? Today in this explainer, we're cracking open a massive medieval cold case. We're going to explore how a wildly complex church appeals process managed to systematically overturn one of history's most infamous verdicts, a whole 25 years after the fact.
So what happens when a 25-year-old guilty verdict suddenly threatens a king's crown? Let's dive right into the inciting incident here. Imagine you're King Charles VII of France. You literally owe your crown, your entire legitimate rule, to a teenager who escorted you to your coronation. But then, that same teenager gets condemned by a church court as a heretic and a witch. Suddenly, your whole divine right to rule looks like it was orchestrated by a criminal, or worse, a demon. As you can guess, that is a massive, massive political liability.
Which brings us to Section 1, a heretic's royal problem. So we've got this true crime mystery unfolding on a truly royal scale. Now, for almost 2 decades, Charles VII couldn't really do much about this because Rouen was under English occupation. But fast forward 25 years after Joan's execution, and a huge turning point hits. In 1449, Charles finally recaptures Rouen. He gets his hands on the original trial archives, and he is absolutely desperate to clear Joan's name and wash this stain of heresy off his throne. This kicks off preliminary inquiries around 1450 and 1452, which ultimately culminate in the official nullification verdict in 1456. It was this incredibly slow, meticulous unraveling of a deeply entrenched historical lie.
Now, we need to be really clear about what the actual goal was here. We are not talking about a simple royal pardon. A pardon kind of implies the person was guilty, but hey, we're forgiving you anyway. Nullification is totally different. This extraordinary legal procedure meant proving the original 1431 trial was corrupted, totally illegal, and completely void from the very second it started. This wasn't just a favor from the king, it was a high-stakes, rigorous investigation digging straight into the church's own judicial machinery.
Section 2. A mother seeks justice.
While the king definitely had his political motives, the true emotional core of this cold case, that belonged to Joan's grieving family. Her mother, Isabelle Romée, and her brothers were the ones who actually petitioned Rome to reopen the case. And the human element here is just absolutely heartbreaking. In November 1455 at Notre Dame in Paris, Isabelle officially brings the suit forward. She was so overcome with grief while describing her daughter's cruel death by fire that she actually had to be escorted away. But not before demanding that her daughter's name be restored, and that the notorious infamy attached to their family be completely wiped clean. To honor that desperate plea, the Pope authorized a truly massive medieval investigation. The Papal Commission managed to track down and interview over 115 witnesses. 115. This wasn't some quick paperwork review in a dusty room. They were actively talking to people from literally every single phase of Joan's short life to piece together what actually happened.
Moving on to Section 3, the Traveling Tribunal.
This massive investigation was spearheaded by Inquisitor General Jean Bréhal. He essentially put together a traveling tribunal that went on the road, holding inquiries all across France. And when you compare the two trials side by side, the contrast is staggering. The original 1431 trial was overseen by a pro-English faction, highly biased judges, zero defense counsel for Joan, and held in a secular military prison. But the 1456 nullification trial, that followed proper ecclesiastical court procedure. It brought in a diverse array of higher clergy from all over Europe who actively sought out real eyewitnesses to uncover the truth.
And man, the witnesses they managed to find were incredible. We're talking childhood friends from Domremy who remembered her as devout and perfectly honest. They brought in legendary battlefield commanders like Jean Dunois, who swore up and down that her military prowess was straight up divinely inspired. They even got testimony from noblewomen like Jeanne de Prailly, who had physically examined Joan years earlier to verify her purity. And perhaps most importantly, they tracked down and questioned the surviving insiders from that corrupt 1431 tribunal itself.
That brings us to Section 4, exposing the corrupt trial. So, as Inquisitor Bréhal starts questioning these former tribunal members and clerks, the massive cover-up completely unravels. They were exposing a literal judicial murder. The list of procedural violations from 1431 is frankly shocking. Not only did they deny Joan legal counsel, but the judges actively falsified the court transcripts to hide evidence that supported her. They used twisted theological trap questions to try and corner an uneducated teenager. And crucially,
They illegally locked her in a secular English prison guarded by men, repeatedly ignoring her desperate pleas to be guarded by nuns, which, by the way, was her absolute right under church law.
And the crazy part? This isn't just modern historical speculation. This came straight from the testimony of Guillaume Manchon, the chief notary who actually recorded the original 1431 proceedings. He and others, like the bailiff John Massieu, admitted right on the record that the English had severely pressured the judges and actively twisted the transcriptions. They basically admitted the whole thing was a targeted political hit job driven by a mortal hatred of the French.
Well, this brings us to the specific mechanical trap they used to actually execute her. See? Under Inquisition law, an initial heresy conviction usually just got you prison time. But a relapse, meaning you return to a heresy after formally renouncing it, that carried an automatic, non-negotiable death sentence. And for Joan, this fatal charge of relapse was based on one specific thing: the fact that she put her men's clothing back on while sitting in her prison cell.
So how did the 1456 investigation deconstruct this trap? Well, in the original trial, the judges wildly cited the Bible to claim her men's clothing was an abomination. But the appellate witnesses revealed the horrific truth. Joan didn't resume wearing tightly laced male clothing out of some rebellious defiance. She did it as a desperate defense mechanism to protect herself from being assaulted by her secular English guards. They literally took her dress away or forced her into a position where she had to protect herself. The original judges knew this entirely, and they deliberately used it as an excuse to secure her execution.
Section 5. The verdict overturned.
All right, so with massive fraud, blatant witness tampering, and horrific prison conditions brought to the light of the day, the Inquisition was finally ready to correct its fatal mistake. In June 1456, Inquisitor Brahal draws up his final judicial analysis, which was this incredibly thorough, nearly 200-page document. And the findings? Absolutely decisive. First, he declares the 1431 trial completely fraudulent and politically driven. Second, he completely turns the tables and posthumously condemns the original lead judge, Pierre Cauchon, for malice and heresy. And third, he formally recognizes Joan of Arc's tragic death as a true martyrdom.
The real climax of this explainer hits on July 7, 1456. Picture this. In the Archbishop's palace in Rouen, the exact same city where Joan had been burned to ashes 25 years earlier, the definitive verdict is read aloud to the public. The original sentence is declared null, void, and entirely without effect. And in this incredibly symbolic, deeply cathartic moment, a copy of the false 1431 accusations is publicly torn up and physically destroyed right there.
The historical impact of this nullification was just massive. Practically overnight, Joan's legacy was transformed from a condemned criminal into a cleared, celebrated martyr, finally washing away that stain of infamy for her grieving mother. The corrupt court was completely exposed for what it was, and, just as he had initially hoped, Charles VII's crown was legally legitimized, forever detaching his reign from the taint of sorcery. We want to leave you today with this thought. It took 25 whole years, a major shift in political power, and a grieving family's relentless petitioning to force a massive institution to finally admit it executed an innocent 19-year-old girl just for political gain. Now, while the 1456 trial obviously couldn't bring Joan of Arc back, it fundamentally altered her legacy for the rest of human history. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How long does it actually take for a massive institution to truly reckon with its own historical mistakes? Thanks so much for joining us on this explainer. Until next time, keep questioning the history you think you know.